Art was a secret language for those who knew how to read it. Beneath the serene faces of saints and the noble scenes of battle in medieval tapestries and paintings lies a hidden world of coded messages. We are going to learn that visual vocabulary together, giving you the ability to see these ancient masterpieces not as simple decorations, but as complex historical documents. You will discover how a seemingly straightforward tapestry justified a brutal conquest and why a beautiful unicorn hunt was really about something much deeper than sport. By the end of this, you will never look at medieval art the same way again, forever seeing the whispers of political intrigue, forbidden romance, and spiritual rebellion woven into the fabric. What story do you think has been waiting centuries to be told? This symbolic language was a form of communication as precise as any written text for those initiated into its meanings. Think of it not as a loose collection of pretty pictures, but as a structured grammar of faith and power. A single glance could convey a complete theological argument or a statement of political allegiance, all without a single written word. The lamb, for instance, was not merely a gentle farm animal. It was a direct and potent symbol for Christ, the Lamb of God, whose ultimate act was one of profound sacrifice for humanity. Similarly, the pelican was believed to pierce its own breast to feed its young with its lifeblood, making it a powerful emblem of selfless love and redemption. Even the choice of color was deliberate and costly. The deep, celestial blue derived from crushed lapis lazuli, a stone more precious than gold, was almost exclusively reserved for the robes of the Virgin Mary, immediately signaling her divine status and heavenly grace to the viewer. This entire system transformed a tapestry or a painting from a simple decoration into a dense, multilayered text. Learning this visual vocabulary is like finding the master key to a locked library. Suddenly, the stories on the walls begin to speak, revealing a world of hidden debates and silent proclamations. Now, with this key in hand, we can approach our first major case study and listen to what it has been waiting to say. The Bayeux Tapestry unfurls a story everyone thinks they know, but its true power lies in the details its Norman creators carefully stitched into place. This monumental embroidery was not a neutral historical document. It was a masterclass in political storytelling, commissioned by the victors to legitimize their conquest of England. Every scene, every figure is a deliberate argument woven in wool. Consider the moment of Harold Godwinson's coronation. Just as he takes the throne, the artist has placed a blazing star in the sky. To an 11th century viewer, this was not a pretty decoration. It was Halley's comet, a celestial portent universally understood as a sign of God's displeasure, a divine rejection of Harold's claim. The message was clear for all to see. His reign was ill-fated from the start. In stark contrast, William the Conqueror is presented as the picture of pious and decisive leadership. He is consistently shown in consultation with his advisors, his actions blessed by the presence of bishops, his invasion framed not as a greedy land grab, but as a righteous campaign to reclaim a throne that was sworn to him. The tapestry's very existence, likely displayed in a place of high authority like Bayeux Cathedral, served a crucial purpose. It was a constant, visual reminder to the conquered Anglo-Saxon population that Norman rule was not just a matter of military might, but a divinely sanctioned order. This was a narrative weapon designed to shape public perception for generations, transforming a brutal conflict into a story of rightful inheritance. It demonstrates with stunning clarity how medieval art was used to seize control of the historical record itself. a theme of royal propaganda we will see echoed again and again. But the language of symbols was not reserved only for the grand narratives of conquest. It could also weave together the sacred and the deeply personal, as seen in the mesmerizing layers of the Hunt of the Unicorn tapestries. Here, a vibrant, almost magical forest holds a story that shifts and changes meaning before your eyes. At first glance, this is a straightforward scene of aristocratic leisure, a noble pursuit of a mythical beast. Yet every flower, every gesture is a piece of a complex puzzle. The unicorn itself is the central key, a creature of pure white that medieval viewers would have instantly recognized as a symbol of Christ. Its pursuit, capture, and apparent passing directly mirror the Passion story, a spiritual allegory of sacrifice and ultimate triumph. In the final and most famous panel, the unicorn in captivity, the creature is shown alive and serene, enclosed within a small fence. This is not a prison, but a representation of resurrection, a powerful statement of eternal life. Yet turn the key slightly, and an entirely different story unlocks. Many scholars see a compelling allegory of courtly love, where the unicorn is not a divine figure, but a representation of a human beloved, tamed and captured only by a virtuous maiden. This duality is the true genius of the work. It could speak simultaneously of divine love and human romance, its meaning fluid, depending on who was looking and what they sought to find. The surrounding flora is not mere decoration, it is a dense visual text. Each plant carries a specific message. Delicate strawberries scattered throughout the undergrowth symbolized righteousness and purity of thought. Carnations with their intricate petals were a clear nod to betrothal and marital love. Even the humble thistle, with its protective spines, could represent the earthly troubles or temptations one must navigate. This intricate botanical code transforms the entire scene into a conversation about desire, virtue, and the ideals of marriage. The tapestries become a silent dialogue, a sophisticated game of meaning meant for an educated courtly audience who could read these natural symbols as easily as we might read a letter. This ability to operate on multiple levels at once, to be both a spiritual guide and a secular romance, reveals the incredible sophistication of the medieval artistic mind, a mind that thought not in simple pictures, but in rich, interwoven layers of significance. Behind every coded tapestry and painting stood a person with a purpose, the patron who commissioned the work and held the key to its hidden message. This individual, be it a powerful bishop, a wealthy merchant family, or a reigning monarch, was not a passive financier. They were the author of the narrative, directing the artist to embed specific symbols that served their distinct agenda. A religious leader might demand prominent depictions of saints to publicly demonstrate his piety and secure his legacy. A queen or king would insist on symbols of their dynasty's unshakable strength and divine right to rule, transforming a wall hanging into a declaration of their legitimacy. Think of a specific coat of arms or a personal emblem woven into a corner. This was not merely decorative. It was a direct, unmistakable assertion of identity and power, a signature claiming ownership over both the artwork and the story it told. By shifting our focus to the patron, we change the fundamental question we ask. We move from a simple "what does this symbol mean?" to a far more revealing "why was this specific message so important to this particular person at this precise moment in history?" This investigation uncovers the political ambitions, the social climbing, or the personal anxieties that breathed life into the art. A vague symbol of a lion becomes a targeted communication when you learn it was commissioned by a king known as the Lionheart. What might seem like a generic scene of worship transforms into a strategic display of piety, by a merchant seeking to erase the stigma of his newfound wealth and gain acceptance among the old nobility. This crucial context is the lens that brings the entire picture into sharp focus, turning beautiful obscurity into deliberate, calculated communication. And while the patron provided the instructions, it was the artist, the often anonymous cryptographer, who had the immense task of turning those ambitions into a visual reality. This creative encoding was a deliberate act of visual cryptography. The medieval artist understood that their brush or needle could convey layered meanings far beyond the surface image. Their first and most powerful tool was composition itself. Hierarchical scale is a perfect example, a code so simple it becomes brilliant. By rendering a saint or a king physically larger than the surrounding figures, the artist immediately communicated a fundamental truth of their world. Some individuals simply held more spiritual or temporal power. You did not need to read a title to understand who the most important person in the scene was. The hierarchy was literally woven into their size. This visual shorthand instantly established a sacred or social order for the viewer. But the artist's cunning did not stop there. They often reserved their most daring or subversive thoughts for the edges of the work, the margins of an illuminated manuscript. Here, in the realm of the bizarre and the grotesque, known as Marginalia, a rabbit might arm itself for battle against a snail, or a monk might be depicted with a fox's head. To the untrained eye, these were simply whimsical doodles, the playful flourishes of a bored illustrator. Yet for those in the know, these scenes were a goldmine of social satire and at times quietly heretical commentary. A censor's attention would be firmly fixed on the central, orthodox religious text, completely missing the critique of clerical corruption or societal folly playing out just inches away in the border. It was a safe space for dissent, hidden in the artistic equivalent of plain sight. Even the selective framing of a biblical narrative was a form of coding. An artist or their community might choose to emphasize Christ's mercy in one scene while subtly downplaying his judgment in another, quietly promoting a specific theological viewpoint through the simple power of editorial choice. Every technical decision, from the size of a figure to the content of a border, was a potential carrier of a hidden signal. This sophisticated toolkit for clandestine expression finds its ultimate manifestation in a genre designed specifically for this purpose, the allegory, where nothing is merely what it seems. Allegory transformed the canvas into a philosophical battlefield where ideas clashed in vivid color. This was not merely a style of art, it was a complete way of seeing the world, a belief that every visible thing pointed toward an invisible truth. In these intricate works, a beautiful woman was not a person, she was the embodiment of chastity. A fiery warrior was not a soldier, but the very spirit of wrath made manifest. A manuscript like the Psychomatia stages this conflict with stunning clarity, showing virtues and vices not as abstract concepts, but as armored combatants in a spiritual war. You witness chastity, cool and resolute, defiantly facing the chaotic advances of lust. You see patience, a figure of immense calm, standing firm against the blind, red-hot rage of anger. This visual drama makes the internal struggle of the human soul immediate and tangible. A viewer is not just observing a fight, they are being asked a profound question. Which knight within you will win the day? This layer of abstraction was the allegory's greatest strength. It allowed artists and theologians to stage the most complex philosophical debates in a format that was accessible to a largely illiterate population. The average person might not have been able to read St. Augustine's writings on moral conflict, but they could understand the story being told when humility struck down pride with a well-aimed spear. These scenes served as unforgettable moral lessons, their messages burned into memory through powerful imagery. Furthermore, this symbolic veil provided a crucial safety mechanism. By framing a critique of corruption as a battle between charity and avarice, an artist could comment on the greed of the powerful without directly naming names. The allegory became a shield, allowing for the exploration of dangerous ideas about faith, power, and human nature under the guise of a timeless, universal story. It was a conversation about the most pressing issues of the day, cleverly disguised as a simple fable. This tradition of embedding hidden meaning reaches its breathtaking, and perhaps most bewildering, peak in a work that continues to puzzle historians to this day. A knight clad head to toe in steel plate was an anonymous figure on the battlefield until he wore his identity on his sleeve. His shield and surcoat blazed with a unique combination of colors and shapes, a visual identity card that spoke when he could not. This was heraldry, and it was far more than decorative pageantry. It was a rigorous public code, a language of symbols as precise and regulated as any legal document. Think of a coat of arms not as a simple picture, but as a medieval QR code designed to be scanned and understood in an instant. Every element was deliberate. A field of gold spoke of generosity and elevation of mind. A rampant lion was not just a wild cat, but a bold declaration of courage and noble strength. The eagle, with its piercing gaze and soaring flight, was a claim to imperial authority and far-reaching vision. Even the humble fleur-de-lis, the stylized lily, was an emblem so tied to French royalty that its presence immediately anchored its bearer to that powerful dynasty. This was a system where your family history, your political alliances, and your personal valor were all woven into a single, unforgettable emblem. When these heraldic codes were integrated into a tapestry or a painting, their power multiplied. A noble family commissioning a religious scene did not simply want to admire a biblical story. They wanted to be seen within it. By having their coat of arms meticulously woven into the borders of a scene depicting the Nativity or the Last Supper, they were making an audacious claim. They were visually inserting themselves into sacred history, asserting that their power and piety were part of a divine plan. This was not just art, it was a form of spiritual and political legitimization. A lord viewing such a tapestry in his great hall was constantly reminded that his authority was sanctioned by heaven itself. This practice makes these artworks incredibly valuable to historians. Decoding a single, forgotten coat of arms in the corner of a tapestry can be the key that unlocks the entire piece. It can identify the Patron family, help date the work to a specific generation, and reveal the web of marriages and alliances the artwork was meant to celebrate or solidify. A tapestry was not just a story, it was a public declaration, a frozen moment of propaganda meant to shape the perception of a family's legacy for centuries to come. This visual language of identity was so potent that its echoes can be found in the most intimate of spaces, far from the battlefield or the great hall, in the quiet corners of personal devotion and private belief. This sophisticated system of visual echoes finds its most profound expression in a concept known as biblical typology. For the medieval mind, history was not a straight line but a divinely woven tapestry, where events of the Old Testament were seen as preordained shadows or types cast forward to find their ultimate fulfillment or antitypes in the New Testament. Artists became masterful interpreters of this sacred pattern, translating complex theological ideas into immediate, powerful imagery. One of the most poignant examples pairs the sacrifice of Isaac with the crucifixion of Christ. In a single glance, a viewer would see young Isaac carrying the wood for his own sacrificial pyre, a clear and heartbreaking foreshadowing of Christ carrying the cross to Golgotha. The parallel is unmistakable, a visual argument for a universe governed by a divine plan. In the luminous colors of a stained glass window or the delicate pages of an illuminated manuscript, these paired scenes were placed side by side. Jonah being released from the great fish after 3 days directly prefigured Christ's resurrection from the tomb. The bronze serpent lifted by Moses in the desert, which brought healing to those who looked upon it, was understood as a direct precursor to the crucified Christ raised on the cross for humanity's salvation. This was not merely illustrating 2 different Bible stories. This was demonstrating a core belief that the entire Scripture was a single, interconnected narrative of promise and fulfillment. Decoding these typological pairs allows us to step directly into the medieval worldview, a perspective that saw divine fingerprints across all of time, where every ancient event whispered a secret that would one day be shouted from the cross. This method of layered, comparative storytelling was so powerful and ingrained that it naturally flowed from the sacred to the secular, shaping how artists told stories of human lives and earthly power. A knight kneeling before his lady was performing a sacred ritual of its own. In the secular art of the later Middle Ages, the grand halls of castles and the private chambers of the nobility were adorned with scenes that spoke not of Scripture but of the human heart. These tapestries and delicate ivory carvings became the primary stage for the complex, often rigidly structured ideals of courtly love and chivalry. This was a world where emotion was governed by elaborate rules, and art provided the perfect language to express its forbidden or idealized depths. Consider a scene where a knight clad in armor receives a delicate veil or a sleeve from his lady. To a modern eye, it might look like a simple token of affection. But in its time, this was a powerful symbolic transaction. The favor was not just a pretty gift, it was her public approval, a charge that governed his every action. His victories in the tournament and his conduct on the battlefield were now a direct reflection of her virtue and his devotion. His prowess was no longer just for his own glory, but for hers, binding them together in a public performance of private feeling. This code even extended to popular motifs like the hunt. A vivid tapestry showing a noble party pursuing a deer or a boar was rarely just about the sport. It was a widely understood metaphor for the pursuit of the beloved. The elusive quarry represented the object of desire, the chase mirrored the patient, dedicated quest for a lady's favor, and the final capture symbolized the hoped-for culmination of chivalrous efforts. This allegorical hunt allowed artists to depict the thrill and tension of romance under the perfectly acceptable guise of aristocratic leisure. The natural world within these scenes was anything but random. It was a blooming, scented code. A rose, particularly a white one, was not merely a beautiful flower. It stood for secrecy, a reminder that the truest feelings were often those kept from public view. A humble violet signaled modesty and faithfulness, while the vibrant marigold could represent the sorrow of a love parted. An entire conversation about desire, patience, and virtue could be conducted through a meticulously woven garden. For those living within a social structure that often arranged marriages for power and property, these artworks became a vital safe space. They were where the heart's true longings could be idealized and explored, where the strict rules of society could be momentarily bent through the beauty of a symbolic language. This exploration of profound, often hidden, human emotion through allegory would naturally seek even higher forms of expression, taking a dramatic turn from the earthly garden into the realm of the mystical and the divine. Hildegard of Bingen received her visions as blazing symphonies of light and form, impossible to describe with ordinary words. Her response was to create art. The illustrations for her book Civias are breathtakingly strange, not pictures of people and places, but intricate architectural diagrams of divine truth. She builds her revelations from concentric rings of fire, human figures nestled within wheels of cosmic order, and rivers of liquid gold symbolizing the living spirit. This was a radical act of translation, an attempt to codify the ineffable into a visual language her community could follow towards spiritual awakening. To understand Hildegard's art, you must abandon any search for a literal scene. Instead, you are asked to contemplate the structure itself, to walk the symbolic pathways she lays out. A golden sphere is not a sun, but the entirety of the universe held within divine love. A tower studded with eyes is not a building, but the ever-watchful strength of the church. This is a code of a different order, one not designed for political persuasion or social climbing, but for pure spiritual transcendence. It offers a direct line from a visionary's inner world to the seeking heart of the viewer. Julian of Norwich, another profound mystic, used a different kind of symbol. Her famous vision of a tiny hazelnut, which she understood as containing all of creation, is a masterpiece of minimalistic coding. That one small object held in the palm of her hand communicated the fragility, the preciousness, and the complete dependence of the entire cosmos on God's care. The power of this mystical art lies in its purpose. It does not seek to conquer or claim, but to connect and illuminate. It reminds us that the most profound codes hidden in medieval art were often maps for the soul's journey, intended not to obscure truth, but to make the unbearable radiance of divine love visible to human eyes. This sacred attention to the smallest details of creation, from a cosmic wheel to a single hazelnut, naturally guided the artistic gaze downward, from the heavens to the earth beneath their feet, finding a different kind of code woven into the very flora and fauna that surrounded them. A walk through a medieval garden was a stroll through a living sermon. Every blossom and every leaf held a secret, a carefully assigned meaning that transformed a tapestry's background into a rich moral commentary. This intricate language of flowers, known as floriography, allowed artists to weave a secondary narrative right alongside the primary action, speaking in a code of petals and thorns. The pristine white lily was so powerfully linked to purity that it became the definitive floral attribute of the Virgin Mary, its presence in a scene an immediate signal of her untainted virtue. But the symbolism often delved into beautiful complexity. Consider the humble strawberry plant. Its three-part leaves were seen as a direct nod to the Holy Trinity, while its bright red fruit, often shown being nibbled by virtuous figures, represented the sweet rewards of a righteous life. This was not random decoration, it was deliberate theological reinforcement. Even plants we might consider weeds carried potent messages. The snapdragon, with its jaw-like flower that opens when squeezed, was not a charming garden variety. It symbolized deception or even presumption, a warning woven directly into the floral border. To decode this botanical text is to overhear the artist's whispered judgment on the scene unfolding in the foreground. A scene of a knight and his lady surrounded by delicate roses speaks of secret love and passion. That same scene, framed by thorny thistles and sly snapdragons, suddenly carries a cautionary tone, questioning the knight's intentions or the lady's vanity. This meticulous attention to every leaf reveals a profound medieval worldview, one that saw the entire natural world as a divine book written by the hand of God. Every living thing was a symbol pointing toward a higher truth, a belief that would soon extend its reach from the peaceful garden to the very architecture that framed these sacred stories. The vault of a church ceiling could be a map of the entire cosmos, a painted universe where divine order was made visible for all to see. This was not an artist's flight of fancy. but a deliberate representation of the medieval understanding of reality, a universe structured in perfect, harmonious layers. In breathtaking mosaics and illuminated manuscripts, Christ in majesty is often shown enthroned at the very center, encircled by bands of color that represent the celestial spheres. This is a direct illustration of the Ptolemaic model, where the Earth sits at the heart of creation, surrounded by the nested orbits of the Moon, the Sun, the planets, and the fixed stars, all moving in a divine symphony directed by God's hand. This imagery was a powerful assertion that the cosmos itself was a sacred architecture, and that human existence, though small, had its fixed and meaningful place within this grand design. This connection was made tangible in the everyday pages of a Book of Hours. In the calendar sections that marked the liturgical year, you will often find the labors of the months paired with their corresponding zodiac signs. A scene of farmers sowing seeds in October is neighbored by the symbol for Scorpio. The grape harvest for September appears alongside Virgo. This was far more than a decorative pairing. It visually cemented the belief that the macrocosm of the heavens was intimately linked to the microcosm of human life. The rhythms of the church, the toil of the fields, and the passage of the stars were all part of one interconnected, God-given order. Decoding these cosmological elements allows us to understand how medieval people found profound meaning and purpose in this perceived symmetry, seeing their own lives as a reflection of a universal pattern. This intricate relationship between the celestial and the earthly was not solely spiritual, however. It also represented a form of practical, applied science, a way of navigating the world through the silent language of the stars. Within the guarded libraries of monasteries and royal courts, another secret language flourished, one that sought to unlock the very secrets of matter and spirit. Alchemical manuscripts present a world of bewildering images that defy simple explanation. A king and queen join hands in a mystical wedding, their union representing not a political alliance but the fundamental fusion of sulfur and mercury, the primal principles of existence. A serpent, the Ouroboros, coils into a perfect circle, its tail in its mouth, creating an eternal symbol of cyclical renewal and the unity of all things. Perhaps most striking is the image of a vibrant green lion, jaws agape as it appears to consume the sun itself. To the casual observer, these scenes might seem like the stuff of wild fantasy, but to the trained alchemist, they were precise, coded instructions. The green lion was not a beast of the forest, but a representation of a critical, volatile stage in the great work, the magnum opus, the process of transforming base metals into philosophical gold. This was a science of the soul as much as it was of the laboratory, where every chemical reaction mirrored an inner spiritual refinement. The purpose of this complex visual code was twofold. It acted as a protective cipher, shielding profound and potentially dangerous knowledge from those who might misuse it without the proper moral and intellectual preparation. At the same time, for the worthy seeker who had studied the symbolic keys, these very same images became a luminous path to enlightenment, a map for personal and cosmic transformation. This tradition of encoding secret knowledge connects directly to other, more quietly subversive messages hidden in plain sight, where the stakes were not just philosophical, but deeply personal and often perilous. But the tapestry of hidden meaning was not solely woven by the powerful. In the shadow of strict religious authority, art could become a quiet, potent form of resistance. For communities like the Waldensians or Lollards who dared to challenge the established church, visual storytelling was a clandestine tool for preserving their beliefs. Their art did not scream rebellion. Instead, it whispered a different set of priorities, emphasizing personal faith and humble devotion over grand ceremony. Consider a scene you might find in any church: Christ washing the feet of his disciples. In a mainstream work, this might be one moment among many, but in a piece created within a dissenting community, this act of profound humility could be enlarged, placed front and center, its quiet drama magnified. The message was subtle but sharp, a visual argument that true spiritual power lay in service and poverty, a direct, though unspoken, critique of a clergy living in wealth and grandeur. This was a dangerous game. To be caught openly promoting such ideas could lead to severe consequences. The coding was not just intellectual, it was a matter of survival. This need for secrecy sometimes took an even older form. In the stone carvings of remote churches, if you look closely, you might find a face that is not a saint or a symbol that feels out of place. A leafy green man peering from the architecture, or a folkloric creature hiding among the biblical scenes. These were often the quiet, stubborn persistence of pre-Christian beliefs, woven into the very fabric of the church itself. The community could walk into the building of the new faith and still see the comforting, familiar faces of the old world looking back at them from the stone. These acts of creative encoding reveal a crucial truth. The language of symbols was not a monopoly of kings and bishops. It was also the language of the marginalized, a way to hold onto identity and voice when both were under threat, proving that art could shield a fragile flame of dissent for centuries, waiting for the right eyes to see its light. A splash of gold leaf on a medieval panel was more than mere decoration. It was a physical piece of heaven. Artists understood that color was a language in itself, a direct channel to the viewer's soul, and they wielded it with the precision of a theologian. The shimmering, impossible light of gold leaf was not chosen for its opulence alone. It was the closest earthly material could come to representing the uncreated light of God, a visual metaphor for a divine reality that transcended human understanding. When you see a saint's halo burnished in pure gold, you are not just looking at a symbol of holiness, you are being invited to feel the presence of the sacred, to understand that this figure exists within a realm of eternal, radiant light. This celestial vocabulary extended to the most precious pigments on the artist's palette. The deep, resonant blue of ultramarine, painstakingly ground from lapis lazuli mined in a single region of distant Afghanistan, was literally worth its weight in gold. Its cost and rarity were part of its meaning. Such an extravagant color could only be used for the most exalted of subjects, which is why it became the definitive hue for the robes of the Virgin Mary. That specific blue did not just clothe her, it announced her celestial status and unparalleled purity, setting her apart in a visual hierarchy that anyone, literate or not, could instantly comprehend. Conversely, the color code could be used to condemn. A treacherous or morally corrupt figure might be painted in pallid, sickly tones, their visual presence meant to provoke unease and moral distaste. Judas Iscariot is often depicted in dull, muted hues, his garments visually separating him from the vibrant, life-affirming colors of the other apostles. This was a deliberate strategy, a way of using color to guide the viewer's emotional and spiritual response before they even processed the narrative details. The entire color palette of a work was a calculated system, a silent symphony composed to elevate the sacred and caution against the profane, making the invisible truths of faith tangibly, beautifully visible. These stone and glass structures on canvas are not mere backdrops, they are silent theologians. A building's form could preach an entire sermon, its architecture a deliberate metaphor for spiritual truths. Look closely at a scene depicting the Annunciation. The Virgin Mary is often shown seated in a transitional space, a doorway between two distinct architectural worlds. Behind her, you might see a dark, heavy Romanesque arch, its solidity representing the age of the Old Testament, the law given to Moses. Before her, light streams in from a nascent skeletal structure, the delicate tracery and pointed arches of a Gothic cathedral still being built. This is not an artistic anachronism, it is a brilliant visual argument. The scene captures a pivotal moment in sacred history, the very instant the Old Covenant is fulfilled and the new one brought by Christ begins to rise. The setting itself tells you that the world is being rebuilt. This symbolic language extends to the very identity of the Church. In countless artworks, we see a literal building, often held by a saint or supported by figures representing the apostles, with Christ himself depicted as the cornerstone. This powerful image, drawn directly from Scripture, transforms an abstract concept into a tangible, stable reality. The Church is not an idea, it is a living, spiritual house, and every believer is a stone within its divine architecture. Even a crumbling classical ruin in the background of a biblical scene is a loaded symbol. It speaks of a superseded world, the pagan past or the old law that has been made whole by the new dispensation of grace. To decode these architectural choices is to understand that the medieval artist painted with entire worlds, using the language of masonry and light to make the deepest mysteries of faith visible and solid. This careful construction of symbolic space did not just frame the story, it often dictated the very path the viewer's eye would follow across the narrative. A tapestry's narrative unfolds not in a single glance, but in a measured walk from left to right, a journey choreographed by its creator. This sequential grammar is a powerful form of coding, turning a long cloth into a flowing, persuasive story. The Bayeux Tapestry masterfully controls this pacing. Notice how the artist uses the vertical elements, like trees or the masts of ships, to create natural pauses, subtle breaks that function like the turning of a page. This rhythm is deliberate. It allows the viewer to absorb one event fully before being ushered into the next, building a sense of inevitable progression toward the final, chaotic scene of the Battle of Hastings. The repetition of key figures is another crucial device. You follow the same horses, the same ships, the same faces of William and Harold as they move through the story. This visual anchor prevents confusion, transforming a series of events into the continuous, personal saga of a few central characters. Their recurring presence is the thread that binds the entire epic together. The artist also wields composition like a cinematic director to highlight moments of supreme importance. Consider the death of King Harold. The scene is not merely depicted, it is isolated and framed for maximum impact. The surrounding chaos falls away, focusing all attention on this single, pivotal moment that seals the fate of a nation. This is not just a record of an event. It is a dramatic emphasis, a way of shouting, "Look here, this changes everything." The entire structure, from the pacing to the focal points, is designed to guide your eye and shape your interpretation, making you a witness to a story where the conclusion feels both thrilling and foreordained. This dynamic language of sequenced images was not reserved only for histories of conquest. It became a vital tool for instruction, a way to walk the illiterate through complex spiritual lessons step by step. In stained glass windows depicting the life of a saint, each panel acts as a chapter. You first see their moment of divine calling, then their acts of charity, their struggles with temptation, and finally their glorious ascent to heaven. This visual biography teaches through observation, allowing a worshipper to internalize an entire moral philosophy simply by following the story around the church walls. The sequence itself carries the meaning, transforming static images into a living guide for how to live and what to believe. These vibrant windows were more than just decoration, they were a public library of light. For the vast majority of people who could not read a single word of Scripture, the stories of faith were learned not from parchment but from colored glass. Walking into a cathedral was like stepping inside an illuminated manuscript where every window pane served as a page. The life of Christ, the trials of the martyrs, the miracles of the saints, all unfolded in a radiant sequence overhead. This was deliberate, accessible theology. A scene showing Saint Sebastian enduring his ordeal was not meant to shock the senses for its own sake. It was a stark, visual lesson on the power of unwavering faith, even in the face of immense hardship. It taught that spiritual strength could overcome any worldly pain, and that such profound devotion would be met with a glorious reward in the afterlife. This educational purpose was woven into the very architecture of the sacred space. Positioned above the main entrance, the Last Judgment held a place of immense psychological power. Every person entering the church would pass beneath this monumental scene, a constant, looming reminder of the ultimate consequence of their earthly choices. On one side, the blessed were shown being welcomed into paradise, their faces serene, their postures graceful. On the other, the damned were often depicted in a state of anguish, separated from divine peace. This was not a subtle suggestion, it was a direct and unforgettable visual sermon. It reinforced core doctrines of salvation and damnation, urging piety and moral living through a language of hope and solemn warning that everyone, regardless of their education, could understand. The primary function of this art was to shape belief and behavior on a communal scale, making the complex teachings of the Church immediate, tangible, and deeply personal for every soul who gazed upon it. A commemorative tapestry did more than decorate a hall. It built a fortress of memory for a dynasty. When a royal marriage was finalized, the artwork celebrating the union was not a simple portrait of two people. It was a densely packed declaration of political and biological hope. Every element was chosen to project an ideal future. Pomegranates bursting with countless seeds were woven into the borders as a direct prayer for fertility and a flourishing lineage. Two hounds shown resting peacefully together symbolized the desired harmony between the two families, a visual promise of a stable and powerful alliance. The couple themselves would be depicted not necessarily as they were, but as paragons of youth, virtue, and strength, their very posture an argument for the rightness of their union. This was history written in silk and wool before the ink was even dry on the treaty. The same principle applied to victory commemorations. A tapestry of a conquered city would not show the chaos and hardship of the siege. Instead, it would focus on the moment of triumphant entry, the victor portrayed as a merciful and orderly ruler receiving the submission of a grateful populace. The messy, brutal realities of conflict were carefully edited out, replaced by a clean, morally justified narrative of power restored. To decode such a piece is to ask a simple but revealing question. What has been left out of the picture? The absence of the fallen, the silence on the contentious claims that sparked the war. These omissions speak as loudly as the grand symbols of victory. This drive to control the narrative reveals a universal human longing. From the mightiest king to the most ambitious merchant, the desire to shape how future generations will see us is a powerful force. We all wish to be the heroes of our own stories, and in the Middle Ages, art provided the ultimate tool to cement that heroic legacy, turning fleeting moments into eternal, perfect truths. The margins of a prayer book were a world turned upside down. While the central text spoke of divine order, the borders teemed with babuins, a riot of hybrid creatures and inverted realities. A monk with the head of a fox might be seen preaching to a flock of geese, a clear jab at the empty sermons of some clergy. A heavily armored knight, the epitome of secular power, could be shown fleeing in terror from a determined army of snails. These were not the idle scribbles of a distracted artist. They were a deliberate, sanctioned form of social commentary, a pressure valve for the anxieties and absurdities of daily life. In a society bound by strict hierarchies, the margin was the one place where those hierarchies could be safely and humorously dismantled. The rabbit hunting the hunter was more than a funny picture. It was a fleeting fantasy of the weak triumphing over the strong. A monkey dressed in academic robes, solemnly inspecting a flask of urine like a physician, mocked the pretensions and potential quackery of the learned professions. This visual satire allowed for criticism that would have been dangerous, even treasonous, if spoken aloud. The fearsome, amorphous beast that lurked in the initials of a sacred text often served as personifications of sin or heresy, making the abstract threat of spiritual corruption tangibly monstrous. This creative space gave the artist a unique freedom, a licensed fool's privilege to explore the irrational, the carnal, and the critical. Decoding this marginal world reveals a medieval mind that was not monolithic in its piety, but complex, playful, and deeply self-aware. It presents a vital counter-narrative to the solemnity of the main text, reminding us that even in an age of profound faith, people found ways to laugh at themselves and question the world around them, all within the safe confines of the page's edge. The medium was the first layer of the code, a silent declaration before a single image was even formed. A tapestry, vast and heavy with costly wool and shimmering silk threads, was an undeniable statement of wealth. But its power went deeper than mere display. Unlike a fresco painted on a wall, a tapestry could be rolled up and transported. A duke could have a scene of his military victory woven in one city, then unfurl it in the great halls of his various castles, a mobile billboard proclaiming his authority to every local noble and visiting dignitary. Its scale and material made the message both grand and portable, ensuring power could be performed anywhere. In stark contrast, an ivory diptych served a profoundly different purpose. Carved from the tusk of an elephant, a rare and precious material, its very nature was intimate, small enough to be held in one's hands. Its smooth, cool surface was meant for private contemplation. These delicate panels, often depicting the Virgin and Child or scenes of the Passion, were not for public proclamation but for personal salvation. The act of holding one, of tracing the intricate carvings with a finger, turned the artwork into a direct, tactile connection with the divine, encoding a message meant for a single soul in a quiet moment of prayer. This deliberate choice of material extended to the most permanent forms. A stone sculpture adorning a cathedral's facade was not just a representation of a saint, it was an embodiment of eternal truth. Carved from the very bones of the earth, it was designed to withstand the elements and the centuries, its enduring presence communicating the unchanging, permanent nature of faith and the everlasting power of the institution it represented. Yet, just as deliberate was the use of a painted wooden panel. While beautiful, its surface was vulnerable to cracking, fading, or damage from fire and water. This inherent fragility was not a flaw but a feature, a subtle, constant reminder of the transient nature of earthly life and beauty compared to the eternal realm of the spirit. From the portable wealth of a tapestry to the intimate ivory in a pilgrim's hand, the medium itself whispered the first and most crucial clue about who the message was for and what it was truly meant to accomplish. Yet even the most brilliant symbolic system cannot remain static forever. The slow, profound shift from the medieval world to the Renaissance did not erase the language of hidden messages, it simply gave it a new vocabulary. The focus pivoted from a collective, heavenly narrative to a celebration of the individual human mind and its place in the world. Religious scenes did not vanish, but they were now populated by the faces of living patrons and set against backdrops that glorified the earthly city as much as the heavenly one. The codes became less about universal theology and more about personal legacy, intellectual prowess, and clever political commentary. In Sandro Botticelli's Primavera, the viewer is greeted not by saints but by the graceful forms of classical mythology. At first glance, it is a scene of breathtaking beauty and renewal, but for those fluent in the new humanist language, it is a dense philosophical treatise. The figure of Mercury does not just point to the sky, he turns his back on the cloudy, intangible forms, directing our attention instead toward the fruitful, earthly realm. This subtle gesture encapsulates a revolutionary idea that truth and beauty are to be found in the world we inhabit, not just in the world to come. The painting is a complex allegory for the flourishing of culture under the Medici family, its mythological figures acting as a sophisticated code to celebrate their patronage and power without ever speaking their name. This was a new kind of secrecy, one that prized intellectual discovery and flattered the viewer who was educated enough to understand the classical references. The very techniques that made Renaissance art so revolutionary also became tools for concealment. The mastery of linear perspective created believable, three-dimensional spaces where a hidden symbol could be placed on a receding windowsill or a distant building facade, waiting to be discovered by a discerning eye. The drive for naturalism allowed a patron to have their own portrait painted into the crowd witnessing a biblical miracle, a quiet but audacious claim of their personal proximity to the divine. This evolution reveals a crucial continuity. The medium and the symbols changed, but the fundamental human desire to embed a deeper truth, to communicate something beyond the surface, remained as powerful as ever. The artist's studio was still a place of encryption, but the ciphers now celebrated the individual as much as the institution. A medieval artist's first thought, their initial hesitation, is no longer lost to time. We can now look directly through the finished surface of a painting to see the ghost of its creation waiting beneath. This is the power of modern scientific tools like infrared reflectography, which acts as a kind of X-ray vision for art historians. It can reveal the delicate underdrawing, the original sketch where the artist worked out their composition in charcoal or ink. Sometimes this hidden layer shows a completely different scene, a pentimento where a figure was moved or an expression softened, letting us witness the artist changing their mind centuries after the paint dried. In one fascinating case, a seemingly straightforward portrait of a noblewoman was found to conceal an earlier, more complex allegorical design beneath her sumptuous robes. The final product was a public statement of wealth and status, but the underdrawing revealed a far more personal and philosophical initial vision, a coded message intended for a much smaller audience that was ultimately painted over. This technology does not just show us what is hidden, it reveals the very process of encoding itself. Similarly, X-ray fluorescence can identify the exact chemical makeup of every pigment on the palette. This allows researchers to spot anachronisms, a color that was not invented or available until decades after the work was supposedly created, helping to accurately date a piece and sometimes uncover a forgery. The deep blue of ultramarine, for instance, has a specific chemical signature that confirms its lavish use and helps trace trade routes. When science identifies a cheaper, later blue substitute in a work attributed to a master, the entire history of that piece must be reconsidered. This marriage of laboratory precision and art historical detective work is revolutionizing the field, confirming long-held theories with physical evidence while spectacularly debunking others. It provides a more complete and often more human picture of the artist at work. Yet for every mystery these tools solve, they often uncover a new, even more tantalizing puzzle. Why did the artist decide to paint over that initial, brilliant idea? What pressure, what change of heart led to the final image we see today? The science gives us the clues, but the interpretation, the understanding of the human motives behind the change, remains a compelling and endless detective story. Yet the very act of looking for secrets carries its own risk. Our modern eyes, eager to find hidden messages, can sometimes project meanings that were never there. One of the most common pitfalls is the assumption of a universal code, a single symbolic dictionary that applied uniformly across all of Europe for centuries. This could not be further from the truth. The meaning of a symbol was often a living thing, shifting and evolving depending on the local culture, the specific decade, and even the artistic workshop that produced it. A dog, for instance, might symbolize fidelity in one context, but in another, it could represent nothing more than a beloved hunting companion, a simple detail of daily life with no deeper allegorical weight. This is where the careful work of the historian provides a necessary anchor, preventing our interpretations from drifting into pure fantasy. Grounding a symbol in a specific patron's known desires, in the popular devotional texts of the era, or in the records of the Artisans' Guild gives our decoding a foundation. It is the difference between an educated guess and an anachronistic invention. We must also resist the temptation of over-interpretation, a kind of symbolic paranoia where every color, every leaf, every fold of a garment is assigned a profound and secret purpose. While medieval art is densely coded, we must remember that artists were also concerned with beauty, balance, and the practical conventions of their craft. Sometimes a decorative border was chosen simply because it was a popular design in the pattern book, not because it held a clandestine political statement. The most responsible approach to this visual language is one of balanced humility. It requires us to be both creative interpreters and rigorous detectives, listening carefully to what the artwork suggests while always checking our theories against the hard evidence of history. Acknowledging that sometimes a rose was just a rose does not diminish the magic of these works. In fact, it makes the moments of true, verified symbolic discovery all the more powerful and profound. These whispers from the past captivate us because they answer a deep, human need to look beyond the obvious. In our own world of instant information and fleeting images, the patient work of unraveling a tapestry's symbols feels like a rare form of discovery. It is not a dry puzzle to be solved, but an intimate meeting with minds that, though separated by centuries, were every bit as intricate and inventive as our own. We see their political cunning in the Bayeux Tapestry stitches, their spiritual yearning in Hildegard's radiant visions, and their most private hopes woven into the hunt for a unicorn. This was never a simple or naive art form. It was a complex and deliberate language, a multi-layered system of communication designed to convey everything from royal propaganda to quiet dissent. Engaging with it is far more than an academic exercise. It becomes a conversation across time, a chance to finally listen to stories that have been waiting in plain sight for someone to understand their grammar. That timeless urge to find meaning, to connect with another human voice through the veil of history, is what keeps this search so endlessly compelling. Our journey through the secret world of medieval art reveals masterpieces that are far more than simple relics. They are complex, coded documents waiting for the right eyes to read them. We have walked through the bold political arguments of the Bayeux Tapestry, where every stitch justified a conquest. We have wandered the enchanted forests of the unicorn tapestries, discovering how a single hunt could whisper both of sacred sacrifice and human romance. We have seen how a splash of precious blue could elevate a figure to divine status, and how a playful margin could slyly critique the powerful. This was a world where every color, every symbol, and every compositional choice was a deliberate word in a silent, sophisticated language. The true magic lies in realizing this visual grammar is not a locked door. It is an invitation. The next time you find yourself before a medieval tapestry or painting, pause for a moment longer. Look past the initial scene of battle or devotion. Question the flowers at a figure's feet. Wonder about the coat of arms tucked into a corner. Listen for the whispers hidden in the threads and the pigments. The past is not silent. It is speaking to us in a vibrant visual tongue. We only need to learn how to listen. If this exploration into history's hidden narratives has captivated you, consider subscribing for more journeys into the decoded past. We would love to hear which of these secret messages resonated most with you, so please share your own thoughts in the comments below.